I think most people that I've spoken to anyway since I've been here, and I've been here several times, agree that there is a need for some fundamental change in the system of public education here in France. But almost any attempt to change it gets met with resistance somewhere or other. And that doesn't mean it's not legitimate resistance, but if it's going to change, it has to change somewhere. You have to find some leverage points, and change means it not being the way it was. So if people keep clinging to the way it is, thinking, well, that can't change, what could happen to make quick changes to the French education system? And part of the problem is that this isn't a quick fix. And I look at Finland, for example, I mean, many people do, as probably the best example currently of an education, a national system that embodies the sorts of principles I'm talking about. And that transformation has taken over 30 years in Finland. And it's still in process. They've just announced they're going to get rid of subjects in schools. It's a really radical shift. But the government is behind it. And the point there, this has been a collaborative process between the profession, the government, and all the other interest groups. They recognise it takes a long time to get there. But because they've had that consensus that they need to rethink education, they've had a time frame over which they could do it. And one of the problems, I think, in other countries, and I think it's true here, is that this is a long-term problem and ministerial lives are very short. So it doesn't matter how good this minister is, and I think she's very good from my impression. She may have, what, 3 years? Perhaps 18 months, perhaps less. So it is hard, the way the system is currently configured, for people at the top end to make a big shift in a short time. And I think that's a problem people are going to have to figure out somehow, because the need for change is pretty clear. And some of it will happen anyhow. You know, if kids, many of the current foundations of the system are starting to shake. Like, for example, the assumption that if you go to university, get a degree, your life will be fine and you'll be well paid and have a secure job for life. No, people used to think that. It used to be true. It's not true now. Kids are living in a totally different technological environment. We're facing big issues of climate change. We're facing, in France, all the issues of cultural diversity, of inequality. These are all factors that didn't apply when the system was first formed. And there's a tendency to try and think, well, we just have to secure the system and batten it down and put more struts in and make it more rigid, and it'll withstand all the pressure. And the likelihood is it simply won't, and it'll change anyhow. So I do think people have got to be prepared to engage in that dialogue politically about the sort of changes that are needed, but the problem is the time frame. It's a very mixed picture around the world just now. In America, for example, education is organised mainly at the state level in America. The federal government has a relatively weak role. And one of the reasons is that, well, it's the history of America and how it was formed, and the independent character of many of the states, and legally as well as culturally. But the thing about America is that, you know, often people think that America is a country, and of course it's a continent. It's huge, and it's very disparate. I mean, I live in California, which has a population of well over 30 million. Some states have populations of less than 1 million, and yet they all have equal rights. So there's been a dominant legislation for the past 15 years called No Child Left Behind, which was full of good intentions, but was buttressed by a system of national testing. And the government required these tests, but they didn't provide the tests. That was left to the private sector. So testing has now exploded into a multi-billion-dollar industry in America. I mean, really, it's bigger. I did some figures on this for the book. The National Football League in America in 2013 had receipts of, it was $9 billion. The US domestic cinema box office was $11 billion. The testing industry is a $16 billion business. It's massive. So on the one hand, you've got this political pressure from the top for standardized testing, which is called high-stakes testing because people's jobs depend on it, schools depend upon it. But at the grassroots, people are very restless. There's a big dropout rate, massive turnover in teachers. I think 40% of teachers in America who start in the profession leave within 5 years. Head teachers come and go every couple of years. So it's not working. So there is an increasing grassroots resistance in America. I think people for the large, because I spend a lot of time with groups in America, people feel that we've tried this for 15 years, it's not working, we need to do something else, this is urgent. The other thing that's happening in America, and it's happening in England, is that the governments in both countries are deliberately opening up public education to the private sector. So you have private chains of schools coming in, charter schools which are kind of a hybrid, free schools, and there's no doubt that part of the intention is to break up public education politically, and I think that's a catastrophic idea, really. At least in France, you have a continued commitment to the public sector and a recognition that public education is a right, and it's not, for most kids, it's not their best opportunity, it's their only opportunity. So you can't leave that open to private profit, and certainly in England and in America, that is what's happening. If you look at Asia, China, Shanghai at any rate, and South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, these are all countries that have done well on the international tests for PISA. But in every case, they're saying these tests don't reflect what we're trying to get done here. South Korea has a whole program now, a policy of trying to make education more creative. Shanghai said that China generally, the government says, our future lies in releasing the creativity of our people. Well, they have a big cultural problem or challenge there because they live in a culture that's dominated by a sense of cultural authoritarianism. Well, I've been around long enough now to see these cycles repeat. And I wrote, developed with others, a strategy for the Labour government in Britain in the late 90s called All Our Futures, Creativity, Culture and Education, which set out a very practical plan to embed these principles in the daily practice of schools throughout the country. And the Labour government at the time didn't understand the implication of it and didn't implement the report. And now this government in England is doing exactly the same thing. They think the future lies in the past, that we have to consolidate all our attention on 5 or 6 disciplines in schools, encourage teachers to instruct children more directly, and cut down opportunities for learning by inquiry. Well, it's a big argument, it'll carry on, but I've heard it so often that you do at some point think, well, that history is not linear, it is cyclical. There is change. There are some factors here which have never existed before. I think they're really important. We have a massive explosion in the world population. We have huge technological growth and development. We have accelerating climate change. We are facing existential challenges now as a species that no previous generation of human beings ever did face.